On this episode of Podmentorspace podcast, we are going to talk about a legendary man who lasted for 30 years in the WWE. And let's just break down and review his podcast. If you guys know who I'm talking about, then what are we waiting for? Cue the intro, shall we? Let's go. Hey folks, welcome to Pod Mentor Space podcast, our very first episode, and we're gonna do a review. We're gonna do a breakdown review. I did a blog of this review, so if you guys want to know what the blog is all about, I'll leave the links on Spotify and the link on Spotify and also on YouTube. And I'm just gonna look at my laptop for the notes because I want to speak what I wrote into existence. Otherwise, this podcast would make no sense if I'm just looking at you guys and staring at you. So before we do all that fancy stuff, we do all the content stuff. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, shout out to you guys. And if you're watching this on Spotify, guys, I love you. And thank you. Thank you for at least blessing your ears with our first podcast. And let's get into the content, shall we? First of all, if you guys do not know who Undertaker is, you're probably living in a rock. Undertaker has been the core staple guy for 30 years in the WWE. When I was introduced to wrestling around the time of 2008, this was, I think, when Evolution was breaking up. That's when I saw The Undertaker and his gimmicks, and man, this guy was scary. Once I went down the rabbit hole of his entire story, it just blew my mind. So if you are an Undertaker fan, guys, put in some love, send some love to The Undertaker on this one. So let's get on. So here are some ideas. I listened to the full podcast when I was working out just a couple of days. I listened to the 6 Feet Under podcast. And I mean, tip number one, if you guys are starting out at podcasting, you guys gotta collect stories as much as possible. The man has been in the business for 30 years. I mean, it makes no sense if you hop on a podcast with a man who experienced working in a job for 30, 40, 100 years. You know, they got stories to tell, so compile, journal, write it down, take a photo, take a video, do whatever you want in order to keep these stories so that at least when you hop on a podcast, you have something to share, some kind of substance that makes you human, and that's tip number one. Tip number two, of course, is be authentic. It follows up to collecting stories because the more human you are to another listener, the more you develop some sort of relationship. It doesn't matter about who you are, what you've done in life, whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, or how you ever define yourself. Authenticity is something that is replacing us all, and I notice. So you need to find that way to be authentic as a human being, and have the ability to go out there and say and at the end of the conversation, once you're out of the room, they say, this, I like this guy because he reminds me of so and so and all that stuff. So you have to be authentic. You gotta give in to that authenticity. And once I was scared of the Undertaker, but once the more after I did not know that he was doing his job, which he did really pretty well for 30 years. He really became the Undertaker, and he went through an era of many character changing, character development. But then once he retired and all that stuff, he's just a regular person. That's the reason why I actually made this podcast review, because when I heard his podcast, I said, I gotta make a podcast on this guy, because the energy and the vibe that he gives is so, it feels like you just want to have a conversation and sit and just listen to his stories. It doesn't matter what he's talking about, but stories, man, authenticity. That's tip number 2. And tip number 3, these are for the co-host guys. I mean, you guys, you need to figure out how to be an amazing co-host. You got to be well-rounded. So what do I mean by well-rounded? So here are some 3 tips on how to be a well-rounded co-host. One is this is a 1A 1B. So 1A is you got to have chemistry, of course, and you must know what you know, because as a co-host, first let's go with chemistry. It you you need to dance with your partner. It's a back and forth thing, you know. And I've heard a lot of podcasts where they have such good co-hosts where they bounce ideas, you know. They go in with a plan but then end up having no plan but having an amazing podcast altogether. And that means good chemistry. If you don't have good chemistry, guys, why are you even a co-host for their podcast? It's not like they're paying you anyway. So yeah, you gotta have good chemistry with your main host, and then you must know what you know. Basically, it's a self-explanatory thing. If you're going in a podcast on talking about stuff, you gotta know your stuff. That makes no sense if you don't know your stuff and you're on a podcast. You'll be staring at your co-host for no for 5-10 minutes, and that would be her entire podcast. So that's saying that is the thing about being a co-host. You gotta live up to the job of being able to handle and pinpoint and ping back and forth ideas. And I gotta salute Matthew Linda for being an amazing co-host and having that ability to ping back and forth. Honestly, this is one thing I wrote in my blog was that I was expecting it to be a wrestling content type of thing, but then I was listening and I found out that they were talking about hunting. And at first I found it odd, but somehow they came back into the story, which is the stuff, the wrestling stuff. It just really, I mean, for content wise, I guess they wanted to to just go there and then come back, and they had a direction, but they just wanted to detour, which is good. I salute Matthew for the ability of having that way of going from one subject to the other and having an opinion, having a thought that is just amazing. That's one thing. That's one thing that inspires me from Matthew. And then exactly opening up to tip number 2 for co-host, having Undertaker sitting opposite you in a podcast, that for me is a scary thought, to be honest. You can see I'm not a muscular guy, or at least I try to be. If I say something to offend the Undertaker, damn, I'm gonna go through a table faster than I even count. And I gotta give it to Matthew to have that ability. And the further I listened to their conversation, I noticed that these guys knew each other some way, somehow. So that brings in the kind of idea of they know each other already long before the episode. So there's no breaking the ice, there's no awkwardness, there's just that calm, that calm between both conversations. And yeah, so again, salute to Matthew for being an amazing co-host for the Undertaker. Truly amazing. And tip number 3 for you guys, co-host, don't be too serious, just have fun. If the conversation goes off the rails, the reason why you are there in the first place is to make sure that the conversation gets back to the rails. So that's your job. That's your job as a co-host. You gotta be there, and you gotta be there and deliver and deliver and deliver. Even though the host is going on a massive rant or something, you gotta understand. You gotta understand how to sequence the conversation into. You have to weave it into the most important. So co-host, you guys have an enormous chip on your shoulder, which I do agree. But then That chip on the shoulder will only be alleviated if you guys know how to solve the problem. It's basically in a conversation. It's all about figuring out where you can take that conversation, and just have fun along the way. Don't be too serious, you know. Don't be too strict on structure and all this stuff, because in the end, a conversation is a conversation, and someone will like something from the conversation which will, blow up, and yeah, that itself will be content for you guys. So those are my top three for the co-host. Probably I'd listen to some more podcasts. If you guys have some podcasts you want to recommend, put it in the comment section below. And I also have that question on Spotify. So if you guys have some ideas, leave them in the comment section below. So tip number 4, if you are uh, coming back to Undertaker's podcast, tip number 4, if you guys are doing this, you gotta have an Avengers. You gotta have your Avengers moments. Not every day you get to wake up and do everything. Some, like me, I'm doing mostly everything, from marketing to everything. I'll come to you guys. I know you guys are probably anticipating, what about us? I kind of deviated there. So coming to what I was trying to say about assembling your Avengers, this podcast could not be possible without the production team and everybody else involved. And salute to these guys who are working behind the scenes, scripts, whatever the scripts, video shooting, editing. You guys are the amazing members of the Avengers of the Undertaker, and I gotta give it to you. It is hard. It is hard to do a podcast, especially I listen to a 1 hour podcast. Imagine you sitting there and doing your thing, editing, cleaning up, of course, the ums and the ahs and the filler words. You guys are legends. You guys are not recognized, yes, but now I want to recognize the people behind the 6 Feet Under podcast. Guys, you guys are amazing. You guys are doing a stellar job, and just keep doing it. I don't know, you guys are just killing it, and just keep doing what you do. Salute to you guys, and yeah. And now I'm gonna come to the guys who are the hardest working people in the room, people like us. I agree, I'm also in your batch. So who am I talking to? Who the guys who are doing everything from editing, podcasting, marketing, all these good stuff. Guys, the only advice that I could give you for now is, of course, that you guys gotta work hard enough until the work becomes some form of flow, and you develop that flow, and then you understand that at certain points, once your show takes it to the next level, you take your show to the next level, slowly delegate and slowly build, and slowly, you know take everything as a learning experience, because see, that is the way you grow as a solo caster. You cannot, yeah, in the beginning, yes, you'll have a vision, you'll have something that you want, but of course, if you do the work and you know how it works and how it operates, believe me, conversations will become easier once you have a team, because you at least know what you want to do in the audio, the video, production, scripting, everything, if you do it all, and marketing. And delegating will make it seem easier, and all you have to do is just show up, put a podcast, go, leave, talk to the team, couple of coffee, beer, whatever it is, and then done. Presto, episode done, release, promote podcast. All you have to do is just promote it on your social. So those are the things, that you have to go through in order to get through it. You gotta go through in order to get through it. I don't know where that line came from. If you guys know, leave it in the comment section. I honestly forgot. And yeah, so yeah, you gotta assemble your Avengers. I salute the 6 Feet Under podcast. It's an amazing, amazing podcast. And in conclusion, honestly, when I was writing the blog, I do not know whether to address The Undertaker as The Undertaker or Mark Calloway. So I just said Undertaker with respects to Mr. Mark Calloway. Um, I love the podcast. I love the vibe. I would surely definitely listen to another episode if I'm working out, even though if it's 1 hour and I'd only work out for half an hour. I love it. I just love the energy and I love the vibe of the show. So those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on the 6 Feet Under podcast? Have you listened to it? What are your thoughts? What are the things that you'd probably love to hear about 6 Feet Under podcast? Guys, I love you guys and thank you so much for supporting us in our first episode launch. This is our first episode, first of many. Podmentorspace podcast is here to help you take your podcast to the next level. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner, an intermediate, or an advanced guy, there's always something to learn in the podcasting space. So, with that in mind, don't forget to like, share, subscribe on YouTube. Always follow that button. And yeah, one question for the guys is any. It's an open conversation on YouTube or wherever you can comment. Who do you want me to listen to? And let's make a review out of that podcast. And yeah, I'll do my research and yeah, I'm looking forward to the next review. So thank you guys and um, enjoy your day. And I hope you learned a lot. With that in mind, guys, cheers, guys. You are a legend. And yeah,